I'm going to be telling you the genesis of this book because obviously I'm not going to explain what it is, otherwise you're not going to buy it. You just need to read it to find out. I'm going to explain you how it was created, and somehow I never thought about it before until I planned this talk. It seems that my veganism is intrinsically linked to writing books, and I didn't realize that every time there was something significant in my life, as a vegan, there was a book involved. So this talk is going to be about the genesis of my connection between writing books and being vegan, because this is what has generated these two books. These two books are about veganism, and I've written them. So how is that possible? So I'm going to give you all the background, but the whole thing really falls into two events that were dramatic in my life, that somehow generated the seeds that made this book to grow. One was a dramatic accident, and the other was a dramatic incident. I will tell you about these two in detail, but for them to make sense, I need to give you all the context that led to those, because otherwise they're just incidents and accidents. But the significance of them only can be explained through the context that comes before and after. So that's what I'm going to be telling you, all these contexts, and then we'll get to the accident, and we'll get to the incident, and then we'll get to the book. So that's the talk today. Let's start with the beginning. The context is always big, because everything is connected. We can just never say that we know why we are vegans, we know why we did this and that. It's all connected. So it all started where I was born. At the moment I was born, that connection started. And I was born in the 60s, so I'm a man of the 60s, so I'm a boomer, so generation-wise, and now that perhaps explains a lot of things that you thought about me. And I grew up in Catalonia in the 60s, and that is not a nice time to grow up in Catalonia, because Catalonia was under occupation of a fascist dictator, General Franco, a Spanish fascist dictator. So I grew up under the state of occupation. My culture is a Catalan culture, I'm a Catalan person, and Franco oppressed the Catalans. He didn't like anybody who was not a Spaniard, so he oppressed anybody in the Iberian Peninsula who wasn't Spaniard. That means the Basques, the Catalans, the Galicians, anybody who spoke a different language or had a different culture was oppressed. And of course, he was a classic fascist in the sense that of the three original fascists, Mussolini, Hitler, and Franco. The only difference is Franco didn't join the Second World War, so that's why he survived the Second World War. And he was a fascist for 40 years. And I grew up the last 12 years of his regime. There's very few people alive these days that have grew up in a fascist regime, because obviously those that were under Mussolini and Hitler probably dead now. And so the only remaining ones are the people like myself that grew up in the Franco regime. And therefore I grew up in an oppressive state, and that's probably contributed in quite a degree for me to become vegan later on, because first I empathize easier, I would say, with any oppressed victim, as the animals are, for having experienced being oppressed myself. And I notice when I meet other vegans that often is the case that they had in their life, in this history, some oppression of some sort for whatever who they were. And that made it easier for them to connect. And the other, and that's more linked to the fact of my socio-political growing up, is that at one point Franco died, and he died, and democracy joined, and everything changed radically. So I have seen a radical change from a status quo that everybody said, that's the world, nothing is going to change, that's going to be. So suddenly everything changing completely different than it was before. Which of course, that's the dream for us, that we want to build a vegan world. We imagine this world so different, and you might think, well, we're never going to get it. Well, we have seen changes of that degree. I have seen it in my life. So that also is something that makes you want to pursue the vegan world, because I have had the experience of these radical big changes. So that probably contributed. But the also thing that did is I became very scared of humans. In general, when you're oppressed, everybody is scared. And I didn't want to be with humans. The thing I was most scared of was the police, because of course they were the forces of occupation at the time. So and we call it the grey men, because the uniform was grey, and they all had mustaches, they all had Spanish, nobody spoke Catalan, they were police. So that was my terrifying thing. And then the people that used to mug me as a child. I was mugged 20 times in 1 year. And the reason that happens is because you could not call the police when there was crime. So crime was completely rampant. And I was short, kind of helmet style haircut, big glasses, or perfect target for thugs and bullies. And so I really didn't want to be with human beings at all. So I thought, what can I do that I'm still alive and I'm not with humans anymore? I thought, I should be a zoologist. That's what I should be. I should go to the wild and study animals in the wild and be with animals. That's what I wanted to do. I didn't even know that the word zoology existed, so until I find out, I thought biology, that's what it is. And I did a degree in zoology. At the time, in Catalonia, the degrees were longer than they are now. The degrees, I don't know if you were, through the years, that length of a degree has been shortened. A normal degree in the 60s and the 70s I did in the 80s was 5 years, so I did a 5-year degree. Now it's 3 years. And these 5-year degrees were the first 3 years you become a biologist, and then you specialize the last 2 in either a botanist, a zoologist, or fundamental biologist, and that's genetics, biochemistry. So I become both a biologist and a zoologist. And then I did my PhD on the behavior of social wasps, or a particular species, genus called Polistes. And that's where I become an ethologist. An ethologist is a scientist that studies animal behavior in the wild. In America, they used to call it just animal behavior scientists, and they tend to be quite experimental, do things to animals, see how they behave. The Europeans, we use the word ethology to mean really observing them in the wild without interfering, in learning how they behave in natural conditions. So that's where I wanted to be in the wild. And I decided to study wasps. And in this 5-year degree, I had an experience that was very dramatic with wasps, which I'm not going to explain here because it's one I explained so many times in many of my talks, not to repeat myself. But it was an experience that completely changed my perspective. It was a wasp. I met a wasp. And that wasp told me so much that I didn't want to continue to be a scientist just observing them and just be with animals. And I realized I need to actually protect them. It's so unfair how these animals are treated. They're far more intelligent than one individual and judge me so well. Essentially, that completely judged my demeanor and realized that I was not a threat and realized that I should not be stung. And yet all the humans that had mustache and gray uniforms, they were harming me. So that the contrast of one individual really getting me completely and a human not telling me you speak the wrong language, that made me realize, okay, this is not what I need to do. I need to protect them. But I couldn't do it in Catalonia. In Catalonia, there were people like me, animal protection, but that was not the profession. People could not live from this. They were all amateurs. They all voluntary jobs. They were calling them animalists, and that's the term, animalist, somebody that likes animals. But you could not be a professional. You could not live from being an animalist. But I knew in other countries you could do that. So I knew, okay, I need to leave and find another place. I actually left before finishing my PhD, so I'm not a doctor. I did the whole 2 years, the thesis, but eventually they say, no, I need to move. It's an urge to move to a place where I can protect these animals. And I knew all the places would do it, but I didn't know where and when, so I did a very dramatic thing, being Mediterranean. Everything we do is quite dramatic. So I sold my possessions, and only 2 things were kept, in one bag in my front and the other bag in my back. And I walked out of Catalonia, going north, and I wandered through Europe, trying to find a place where I could be a zoologist and an animal protectionist at the same time. So I wandered through France, didn't work. I wandered through Belgium, didn't work. I wandered through the Netherlands, didn't work. I wandered through Germany, didn't work. I wandered through Denmark, didn't work. By Denmark, I had no money, had nothing, I could not survive. And I had 2 choices. Should I just go north to Sweden, or just go west to the UK? And I had no more money, so I only had a credit card. And I said, I'm going to buy a bus to the UK, to London. And I went to London, and I arrived. And the moment I arrived was 7 in the afternoon, which is good because there was sunset, everything looked nice. And I walked around, I saw a pub, and I saw a TV on the pub. And the pub was the news, evening news. And it was Trevor McDonald. I don't know if you know Trevor McDonald. Was a presenter of BBC, I think it was ITV, I can't remember which one. He was black. And the fact that in the middle of the afternoon, there was a black presenter giving the news made me think that's the place for me. That's the place that they would not reject me. Because the other countries I had been, I fell out. I felt completely unable to survive there. So I made the choice. I'm going to ignore anything that is bad. I'm going to concentrate on anything is good, and I'm going to adapt myself. That was 1993, and I became a British citizen 5 years later. The first 2 years, I had to learn the language. I had spoken no English at all up to that point. And the first word I said in English was in Belgium, asking for directions. I had to taught myself to read a little bit because I had to read scientific papers in English, but never use it verbally. Of course, my pronunciation would have been completely wrong because I never learned the actual pronunciation of the word. So I had to really learn from scratch by surviving. So I went to the Natural History Museum every week to read everything, an entire museum. Then I could read the entire museum, count how many words I knew this time, count how many words until I learned. I had the TV on all the time. I self-taught myself. I used the dictionary, and I randomly open a page, a number, a word, remember that one, until I did the entire dictionary. This is how I taught myself. And for 2 years I was surviving, working as an immigrant, the worst possible jobs. But in summer, I was hitchhiking. I decided, I'm going to hitchhike through the rest of the UK to trying to find a job as a zoologist. I could not even send letters asking for a job because my English wasn't good enough. So I would hitchhike for England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, everywhere. And I would just, any car that stopped me, I would ask, do you know anywhere that might need a zoologist? No, okay, next one. Do you know anywhere? And like this entire islands. And the last place that I had to do was Cornwall. And somebody said, yeah, there might be a place that they might need a zoologist. It's a primate sanctuary in Cornwall, in Lule. It's called the Monkey Sanctuary. They have woolly monkeys. Perhaps they need a zoologist. I said, all right, I'm going to go there. And I hitchhiked there, and I arrived, and I put my foot, if that's the line of the center, I put my foot, and I stopped. I saw the house, I saw a room, and I said, that's my room. I'm going to be living there. And it happened. So I joined, I became a volunteer, I told them that they had to hire me, they hired me, and they gave me that room. And that was the room. And that was my first job as an animal protectionist in the UK, and since then I never worked in anything else other than in protecting animals. All the jobs I've done since, and that was in 1995, as having in animal protection. But it was still a meat eater. I had not met any vegetarian. I only met one vegetarian in my entire life in Catalonia, just one, Jehovah's Witnesses, and nobody else. So, and I was an adult when I left Catalonia. So imagine how alien the idea of being vegan was, that not even a vegetarian seemed plausible to me. When I moved to London the first 2 years, yeah, there were vegetarians I met, but vegan I didn't meet anyone. Until I went to work at the Monkey Sanctuary. And when I went to work at the Monkey Sanctuary, there was a vegan there, or several vegans, but the first person that was cooking at the time was Kate, that she was a vegan. And that's why I had the introduction of veganism at that point. But I thought that was going to be quite difficult. I thought, like many of you, before you were vegan, that I was too addicted to cheese, that was too late for me, that you could do it perhaps at a sanctuary. There was an isolated place, but it would be difficult to do it in the real world. So I thought, well, I probably wouldn't be able to do it. My job at the sanctuary was the rehabilitation coordinator. So my job was trying to take all the monkeys there, they were just a species, the Amazonian woolly monkeys, back to their home, to the Amazon, was to teach them, as an ethologist, I could do that, the skills they had lost generations in captivity, go to Brazil, find a place, and release them there. So it was a perfect job for me, because I spent the entire 5 years I worked there without any winter, because during the winter time in here, I would move to Brazil, trying to find a place, which is summer. So we go from summer to summer to summer to summer, never winter. And we found a place, and I found the perfect area, and everything was ready. And then we had to test the monkeys for disease and things like that. And we discovered a virus known to science, nobody knew at the time, woolly monkey hepatitis B, a type of hepatitis B just for that species, that would make it impossible for them to be returned, because the authorities in Brazil would never authorize a monkey infected. We didn't know there was a virus that existed in the wild, or they were acquired in captivity. There was many questions, but too risky. So my job to rehabilitate the monkeys back, that was made redundant, and so they stopped breeding them, and now they still exist. They're called Wild Futures. They changed the name. They used to be called the Monkey Sanctuary, now they're called Wild Futures. They have other monkeys now. There's only one woolly monkey left from all those times. But I left. But because I had lived working at a sanctuary directly with captive animals that were wild, and I saw the difficulties, and I saw that no matter how much care you give them, they still suffer and they still wrong place. Then I become an anti-zoo person. Then I become, okay, I need to campaign against zoos because this is the model of the best possible zoo, and it still doesn't work. Still they get ill, still they get infections. Obviously you can't do it. So, and then I moved to work at the Born Free Foundation, which is in Horsham, in the zoo check department, running the zoo check department, which is against zoos. And then I became an investigator, going to undercover to visit zoos, do filming them, do reports against them, and try to close them and do campaigns against zoos. And during that time, I was quite successful, and I managed to close 5 zoos through exposés I did. All of them in Scotland, for some reason. I don't know why they all happened in Scotland. But one of them was Glasgow Zoo. Glasgow Zoo was a big zoo, and I managed to close it. And I can say that, and people, you might or not believe me, but that was in 2003. Many years later, this year, there was a Scottish journalist from Glasgow that was trying to write an article about what happened to Glasgow Zoo that disappeared, and was interviewing ex-keepers. And he tried to find me because he knew I was the guy behind it. And he interviewed me, and I'm part of his article because I'm the guy that started the whole thing. I went undercover a couple of times and did some reports. So it kind of became very good at it. And I was such a workaholic, I would not stop. I investigated more than 200 zoos. So I was just there, filming them with concealed cameras, all sorts of things. And during that time is when the accident, that accident I mentioned at the beginning where something dramatic happened. So the Born Free was in Horsham, they're not there anymore. In Horsham they had a building with 3 floors, and I was in the middle on the bottom floor, and at the top floor they had the editing suite where you could edit the videos. So every time I had to produce a video, I would have to go upstairs. And there was a journalist waiting for a video that I exposed about a lion in an enclosure and something like that. And there was a deadline. I was rushing up and down. And I was upstairs, and I forgot the name of the zoo, so I had to put it in the title, so I had to go down to my desk to get it. And when I went down the stairs, I tripped. And then the stairs were narrow, and there were 2 handrail here. And I just tripped, and I was going to fall completely on my face in the middle of the stairs. And I could probably going to break my entire body. But because the railings, I had a split of second reaction time that I thought, if I push myself forward and I move my legs, perhaps I'll be able to land on my feet rather than on my face. If I try to do a pirouette, I can just get my feet ahead and then land on my feet. Very quickly I pushed my head, but I overdid it, and I crashed my head on the ceiling. I pushed too much, and rather than have the time to maneuver, I crashed myself on the ceiling, and I landed on my feet. But then, huge pain. Somehow I managed to crawl upstairs, and then I passed out. The next thing that happened, I woken up by paramedics. So I was unconscious, my mates found me and called the ambulance. And I didn't know this. When you're unconscious through a trauma, you also dream. I thought that you only dream when you just normally sleep, normally. No, I actually had a dream while I was unconscious. And the first thing, and it was an amazing dream, by the way, it was an incredible dream. And when the paramedic woke me up, the first thing I said is, I had this amazing dream. And the paramedic said, yeah, you tell me later, how many fingers can you see? And by the time he did all his things, I'd forgotten the dream. I just knew I had an amazing dream. I just completely forgot the dream. And that event, when we took me to the hospital, it was a concoction, nothing more happened. X-rays, everything was fine. But I had this nagging thing since then of what was that dream I had while I was unconscious. And that made me want to stop, because I was an alcoholic. I never took any holidays. And all my bosses were saying, you need to take holidays. And I thought, perhaps I should take holidays and try to find out about my dream, because perhaps I'm too busy now to remember. But if I put myself in isolation, so where I do nothing, perhaps I will remember. And I thought perhaps I could find an island somewhere in the North Atlantic in winter where it's all dark, and spend, how many days I have on holidays? 23 days on isolation in an island, and perhaps I'll remember the dream. And I thought, I'll try to organize it. And Virginia McKenna, who was one of the founders of Bonfrey Foundation, she had a friend that had a cottage in an island in Scotland, in the Hebrides. And of course, in winter they don't use this; it's just a holiday thing. And they said, "Oh, you can use it." So I did that. I bought all the provisions I needed to eat for 23 days. I was driven to the island and to the small cottage. And I stayed there in isolation. And I thought, perhaps the way for me to get the memory back would be to try to write a book, try to write a novel. And in the process of me trying to get my imagination going, the dream will come out. So I thought, that's what I'll do. I'll be in the island, I'll try to write a novel. And the whole world changed. The fact that I was a workaholic and I had so much stimulation suddenly put me in a place that was night or 2 in the afternoon, was snow, it was cold, was nothing. My brain was trying to generate information that was used to, and that contrast from a lot of stimuli to no stimuli made my brain really work. And I remember the dream. And I remember the dream, and I wrote the novel. And I wrote the novel, and it exists. It's called The Demon's Trial. And it's a very obscure novel. Nobody knows it's me because I use a pseudonym, J.C. Costa, because at the time I was still an investigator. I was still going out visiting too, so I didn't want to use my name. And I published it a few years later, but something happened when I got this dream. I'm not going to explain to you the dream because you want to read the novel. But there was a result of that. I came back from the island as a vegan. I was a meat eater the day I arrived to the island. 23 days later, in January 2002, I came back as a vegan. And so my veganism, the process of my brain from being a meat eater to being a vegan has been documented page by page in a book that is autobiographical, although it's a fiction book, although it's a novel. The character is me, and almost 90% of what happens to the character happened to me. And you can actually see the process that happens in the brain driven by guilt. It's called The Demon's Trial, and I am the demon. And the character is a campaigner who's put on trial by the ghost of all the animals who failed, that he had failed from one reason or another. So this animal protectionist that is trying to help another and consuming another, that cognitive dissonance, I was put in trial. And I'm not going to tell you whether I was found guilty or not. You will need to read the novel if you want to know. But that was the guilt expressing itself in a way that was in my dream and it was in a novel. But I never made more of a big fuss of this, because at that point I should have realized that this is my profession. I should be a writer. Because English is my fourth language. How did I dare to write a book in my fourth language? So it was a proof of concept first. Can it work? Can I do this? And people did like my novel, but I never publicized it because I never thought it could go anywhere. But the people who read it, they did find that I could write, so that was encouraging. But from that point, I never thought I should do this more. I should write more. So I abandoned this idea of being a writer. I left it as a testimony of my transformation as a vegan. But of course, that later on it became evident that I was a writer, that I had really not made a connection. So I was at Bonfrey. Eventually, I left and I became an undercover investigator. I decided to work for many organizations on my own. They hired me to go undercover here. I had learned the skills now. I did it from Brazil to the Bonfrey. And for a while I was freelance, just working, especially wildlife trade and something to do always with wild animals. But eventually, in 2004, I joined the League Against Cruel Sports. I worked for them twice, and that was the first time I worked for them. And the League Against Cruel Sports is against hunting. That was the time that the Hunting Act was passed. And they didn't know whether the hunts would obey it or not. And they passed in 2004, they implemented in 2005, and that's when I joined it. And my role as a hunting campaigner was to go and check whether the hunts would break the law or not, and to try to prosecute them. So that was my job for a while, and it was quite successful. The first successful prosecutions under the Hunting Act were mine. So the first prosecution completely of a member of a hunt was mine, Tony Wright from the Exmoor Foxhounds. That was the first ever of a person, that was mine. The first stag hunting prosecution, a huntsman and a whippering of stag hunt was also mine. So that I became the anti-hunting man. So during my life, I always had I dedicate my obsessions to such a degree that it always become a nickname. So when I was with the wasp, I was the waspman. People knew me as a waspman. When I was with the primates at the center, I was the monkey man. When I was anti-zoo, I was the anti-zoo man. And now I was the anti-hunting man. So I did this for quite a while, helping to gather evidence and to prove that they were breaking the law all the time. And I produced a report called the Trails of Lies, which is the one that exposed the trail hunting as a false alibi. And now everybody is accepting that it's a false alibi, but at the time, nobody accepted. So it was up to me to persuade everybody that they were breaking the law, and now everybody accepted. And that was successful, but then suddenly I still felt guilty. And my book had to reveal one guilt I had. One of the animals that had put me on trial was a bull, for not having done any campaign against bullfighting, having grown up in a bullfighting country and yet never campaigned against it. And I had this thing in my mind, I need to do something against bullfighting. And because the League Against Cruel Sports has this term against cruel sports, the word sports, sometimes bullfighters say is a sport. I thought, well, perhaps they should have a campaign against bullfighting. And I asked them to organize or to start a campaign, and they said, fine, do it. But I said, look, in order to do it properly, I need to actually visit all the bullfighting countries and find out about this. I need to go undercover into the bullfighting industry. I need to go in, get the find information. So do it. And I just went to all countries, 9 countries in the world, and I started to investigate undercover the bullfighting industry, and I became the anti-bullfighting man, of course. And then meet the anti-bullfighting groups and get them together, and I started to create a connection with them. They all had been independently working, and I created a network, international network of all, galvanizing the international movement so they could share tactics, meet once a year. We created the International Anti-Bullfighting Network. It still exists. They still meet every year in a different country, every year. And because of that, they share tactics, they become very efficient. And through years, it worked. I helped to ban bullfighting in Catalonia, so even if I was in the UK, I helped the groups in Catalonia to ban bullfighting there. Last year, they banned bullfighting in Colombia, and that was the same people I was training many years ago. And it was so much happening that I could not do the hunting anymore, so I left the league. And I joined an anti-bullfighting organization from the Netherlands that only do bullfighting. It's called CAS International. And you do that for them for 3 years. And then I came back to all the other countries just to see how the things were going. So I visited them all twice. And that was been quite successful. But eventually I kind of decided, okay, I think I achieved everything I need to achieve for bullfighting. I went back freelance again, more undercover investigation, more consulting, and eventually I also passed and I worked for the International Fund for Animal Welfare. And I was going back to hunting because I still were many illegal hunters in there. I trained investigators, I ran investigations, managed to get more successful prosecutions against hunts. The 7-toed hunt was my prosecution as well. And for a while I was doing hunting again, anti-badger calls again, but never really remembering this book. This book was published in 2006, so I finished to write the first draft in 2002 when I became vegan, but it really took me years to publish it. But again, I never connected the thing, I just carried on doing my animal protection work. And eventually, because the IFA decided not to give more money to the London office, that the London office in IFA was doing a lot of local British subjects like hunting, badger cull, and IFA decided that they didn't want to do more of the local stuff. They wanted to do just elephants in Africa or things like that. So my budget was cut, but I could not pay or hire more investigations. So I decided, well, I'm going to go and leave and back to the league. Let's work again at the league because they do hunting. And I became the head of policy and research at the league and carried on working there. And that is when the incident happened, the dramatic incident. I mentioned about the accident, and now is the incident. The incident is, I was auto-enrolled into a pension fund. Every time you join any organization, you auto-enroll into a pension fund. And as a vegan, I check all the money, all the things that I'm enrolled to, all the things that people give me, I check whether they are compatible with veganism, including pension. So I went and checked where is the money going. So when you have a pension, part of your salary goes to a pension. When you retire, you get the money back. But during this time, they invest it in whatever they want to invest in. And I wanted to know, because I didn't want to be invested in the right thing. And I realized I was invested precisely in the worst possible places. It was invested in vivisection companies that do vivisection, pharmaceutical companies, tobacco companies, petrol companies, the possible worst companies. And I was shocked because that was an animal protection organization having this pension fund. And I remember the first time I worked for them, they had a different pension fund. And that had the label ethical. So that one didn't invest in all this. Something has happened in between. And I complained. My boss said, what happens? I don't want my salary going there. He said, oh, that must have been previous management. We'll change it, don't worry. But nothing happened. So I keep pressuring and nothing happened. I said, well, don't put at least my percentage until this is sorted out. But they put my percentage against my will. And because I never stopped complaining, they fired me. So that was the dramatic incident. They completely fired me for not having dropped the ball on this. And I was shocked because I was completely doing what an ethical vegan would do. I was not doing anything else. And then when I consulted a lawyer, I told the lawyer, look, I think I've been fired because I'm vegan, because what I've done is what a vegan would do, and therefore is the belief. So surely I'm protected because of that. That will be discrimination. And the lawyer said, well, no, because veganism is not one of the protected characteristics yet, because anything that is a belief that is not religious needs to go through a process. And only through that process, then it becomes protected or not. And no, veganism hasn't gone through this process. But if you want, you could be the first. And if you're the first, then we'll see whether it's going to be protected or not. And suddenly, what it was initially an attempt for me to have my dismissal corrected became a big thing, that suddenly, if I could win my case, all vegans would be protected from their own, because veganism would become protected under the Quality Act. But if I lost it, no vegans could be protected. It would be completely my fault. So a huge responsibility. And then I asked the lawyer, how much you charge? And when he told me that I cannot possibly afford this, how can I do this without me having the best lawyers? That's to make bigger story and legal case, and I'm not a lawyer. And how can I pay this? It was an impossible thing to do, but yet it seemed to be the perfect campaign for me to attempt and become obsessed, as I normally are when I do campaigns. So I went for it, and it took me 2 years of litigation, had to crowdfund to get the money, but eventually the 3rd of January 2020, the judge said, yeah, veganism is a protective philosophical belief. It had to be checked against a series of conditions, and it says, I'm overwhelmingly convinced that each of the conditions have been fulfilled. I produced 1,200 pages of evidence to support all these arguments. And he actually, it was a 3 days hearing. The first day he needed an entire day to read my document, because he needed that hours to read the entire document. So by the time that I gave testimony, he had already written, he had already made his mind. So he didn't ask me any question, nobody asked me any question. And normally, the employment tribunal, after the hearings, they go and they send you a written judgment after a few days. And he said, I can tell you now, I already know that yes, veganism is a protected belief, because the press was all there, was completely packed. Nobody ever in the world has attempted this, so the whole press was so interested, completely packed with journalists. So he gave us the verdict orally later. He said it, a 28-page document with the written judgment. That was perfect. But yes, he said he fulfilled all. And because of that, then my case could continue, because that was a pre-hearing. First, you needed to determine that veganism was protected before I could claim I had been fired for being vegan. So the pre-hearing was successful, then my case continued, and I won because of that. So therefore, I was the first to apply, to use that protection, and not the last. And that became also big news. The last time I checked, that was years ago, more than 1,600 websites of 67 different countries talking about the story, because it never been any sort of protection. And I was literally on the press all the time. All the papers, my face everywhere. And of course, it was so huge that the publisher approached me immediately and said, you need to write a book about how you did it. And that is this book, Ethical Vegan. So what I said is, well, how can I write a book? And I remember, I haven't written a book. So I sent this to the publisher. Look, actually, I did write a book about it. And the publisher said, yeah, you can write, you can do it. And I said, well, I want to do it, but not just that. I also want to write about books I want to read that I haven't found because they don't exist. I wanted to read a book about the history of veganism. And there isn't. So can I put it there? Yeah, put it there. I want to write a book about the anthropology of the vegans, which type of vegans they are and what they do. Can I do that? Yeah, do that. I want to write about my life as well. So all the things, or the future of the vegan world, for instance. Also, there's no book about that. So I put it there. So this book is 3 stories intertwined. The story of my legal case, The story of how I became a vegan, all this is explained to you now with more detail, and the story of veganism as a philosophy and how it developed. But it's done in a way that is intertwined. So I started the story here, and then I jump to the next one. So if you only want to read one of the story, you have to read the entire book. So I did it on purpose to force you to read about the philosophy, because you never know when I'm going to be jumping. And it kind of became successful, and I just, since then, 2010, suddenly people start to read the book and say, we like how you write. Can you write for us? Can you write for our magazine, or how you write for our website? Vegan organizations, animal protection organizations approach me, and as a freelancer, I said, yeah, I'll write for you, do blogs, or do news. And without me knowing, I could live from this. I could become a freelance, full-time writer, just writing about veganism and animal protection. And I've been doing that since 2021. There's an average of 2 articles of mine published, not written, published every day since 2021 to today, every single day, somewhere in the world, there's at least 2 articles of mine being published. Saturdays and Sundays, every single day. I've written more than 2,500 articles and blogs and things like that since I started. I became a professional writer. Of course, and then I would go to events like Veg Fest and things like that, and I would have my table with the book, and then people would buy my book. Then they would come back, and they say, I already bought your book at the beginning, and I realized, I need another book, because people come and they say, go without selling it, I need another book, what can I do? And then I thought, hold on, I have written so much already. Why don't I pick up some of the best things I've written somewhere and change them, make them something, and make a book from them? And then I also realized, because the ethical vegan, I make on purpose to be all these 3 stories intertwined. If you want to remember something because you're doing outreach or something, it's difficult to find back unless you took some notes of which page would it be. And I thought, I would need to have something that's more of a reference book, that you can just read in any order, that you can see exactly where things are and come back and find in the same place. And I thought, perhaps I could just do a book about my series of vegan FTA that was with the title, Why is Vegan Don't Consume Honey? Why is Vegan Don't Eat Dairy? Why is Vegan Don't Wear Leather? I wrote several articles of those and thought I could compile those and then write others, new ones. So the book is about 2/3 things are written and updated, but things are written before, and 1/3 is completely new. So, just to make it complete. And of course, I wanted to go more deeper on the philosophy. The philosophy, I touch it in the book Ethical Vegan, but I wanted just to go deeper and deconstruct it a bit more. So the book, the new book, takes some of the issues I wrote in the first one deeper. They go into the philosophy much deeper. They go into the reasons why we've done things much deeper. And it's more of a reference book. It's all, you can read it in any order. So you choose the chapter. You probably need to start with the philosophy at the beginning, but when you read the first and the second chapter, you just change any order you want. And then that will give you the information you want. And each chapter is like a unit that you can take as in itself. That's why I put all the reference at the end of the chapter as opposed to the end of the book. So you can have an entire concept of the book with its own reference, and you can copy and send it to someone. Someone asks you, why don't you like those? Photocopy or pictures, here you go. So it's a useful thing for vegan outreach because it gives you all the details with more reference than the other book. But also for the new vegans, it's a perfect kind of guide of what the things I need to do, especially why I need to do them. What is the reason? So the philosophy, connecting the philosophy with the action. For vegan curious or people that have vegan friends, they don't understand why they don't do that. Well, then if you read the book, so that seems to be a book that might work for many audiences. So I'm going to publish it, and that's the genesis of the book. So I'm just going to read you now to finish the last chapter, and I'm not going to spoil anything because it doesn't matter is the last chapter. As I said, the order is irrelevant, this one. Because it can give you a bit of my style. That's the last thing I'm going to do. And but you can read it in any order you want, but it's best you start with the philosophy first because that grounds you in the rest of the book. So I'm going to read you this short chapter. Is quite short. It's titled, Why Vegans Don't Give Up. You can give up who you are. When you become vegan, you discover something. You find one of your identities you did not know was within you. You become someone different from what you thought you were. Someone different from what other people might have thought you were. Like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, you're not transformed into something new, but metamorphose into a freer and more authentic form of yourself. You rediscover who you really want to be, and in doing so, you have learned that the word vegan you did not think fitted you well before you look into it carefully, now fits like a glove. You find home in veganism, and it feels like you when you say that you are vegan. Non-vegans have a very weak understanding of what veganism is, and this includes all pre-vegans before they become vegan, and all those who think they are already vegan but only eat what vegans eat, a plant-based diet, without having learned and fully embraced the philosophy yet. They may erroneously think that it's just a diet, a fashion, a cure, a style, a club, a culinary preference, a group affiliation, a pseudo-religion, a fraternity, a community, a subculture, a political persuasion, etc. Veganism is much bigger and important than all of that. Veganism is a millennial, universal philosophy that has created a lifestyle, which has created an identity, which has created a transformative global social-political movement aiming to change the entire world. The vegan philosophy gives you a particular worldview based on non-violence and the kinship with all other sentient beings. The vegan lifestyle makes you exclude, in any decision and choice you make every day, any form of exploitation and negative discrimination, direct or indirect, of any sentient being, human or otherwise. The vegan movement makes you contribute to the building of the vegan world of the future, where the way humans treat others and each other will have radically changed, where all sentient beings will be liberated, and where speciesism, exploitation, oppression, discrimination, and harm will no longer be systemic. The vegan identity, though, makes you grow as a person, makes you get rid of fake masks and disguises that were imposed on you by society, and makes you find a kinder, fairer, more compassionate, and more coherent part of yourself that would make you feel proud and at peace with your choices. Because veganism introduced you to a better you, a part of you that already existed but was buried under a ton of falsehoods, once you meet it, you cannot forget it. Once you become vegan, as opposed to just imitating the behavior of vegans for a while or consuming what vegans buy for a change, you cannot go back. Because renouncing veganism would then mean renouncing yourself. Vegans do not give up. They become vegans for life because they don't have a choice anymore on the matter. Although one chooses to become vegan, as veganism cannot be forced on anyone, once you adopt the philosophy to the full, it becomes an ethical imperative, no longer choice. As young pigeons who tentatively choose to step out of the nest for the first time, once airborne, they become flying birds for the rest of their lives. Vegans cannot forget what they know. They cannot erase what they have seen, and they cannot ignore what they have heard. Vegans are aware of the injustices humans have caused and have learned an efficient and realistic way to reverse them, which is the most powerful lesson they have ever learned. A life-transforming lesson that cleanses you from the carnage indoctrination that was corrupting your body and mind and clouding your judgment. Veganism awakens you from a nightmare and finally allows you to walk through the world as an earthling who deserves to roam the planet. We vegans say no to many things. We don't consume some foods, we don't wear some fabrics, we don't use some products, we don't participate in some activities, and we don't support some industries because we have moved on. We have grown out of them. We now do better things. We have grown into better people than we used to be. We have progressed as human beings into a more respectful, equanimous, and ultimately peaceful state. Without having to compromise on lifestyle, because they are vegan-friendly alternatives to most things, without having to live in a bubble isolated from society, because we know how to navigate the modern world, without having to sacrifice on anything important, because we know what matters and help each other, we constantly say no to oppression and abuse, and in doing so, not only survive happily well in most places, but we often thrive, living healthy long lives, intimately connected with the real world and finding inner peace. You don't lose anything for being vegan. You discard the undesirable. You clean your act. You remove the toxic waste others have smeared you with. We vegans don't lose what we reject. We constantly throw it away to unburden ourselves from the carnage indoctrination that poison our existence. We seek the liberation of others because we are liberating ourselves and know how precious this is to anyone who experiences life. We say no to some things because we say yes to life. The best part of it is that we, vegans, are not special. Everyone can become vegan. Anyone can choose to hold a philosophy and seek to exclude all forms of exploitation and cruelty and manifest it according to their circumstances. Everyone from the first months of their planet can say no, and because of that, everyone can become vegan. Why don't vegans do this or that? Why don't vegans conform? Why don't vegans shut up? Why don't vegans give up? Because we know, and now you should. Thanks very much.